This episode of Legends, the series, is brought to you by these fine companies.
Can we see your face as you recite Diamond P Sports presents Championship Drag Racing from the NHRA?
Sure.
All right. I want you to throw the emotion at it.
Okay. Diamond P Sports presents Championship Drag Racing from the National Hot Rod Association.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dave McClelland, and we'll be back in a moment.
I got into drag racing kind of like most every young person I knew back in that day. They just happened to go to a drag race one day. Mine came in Kansas City, Missouri in 1955. I had just graduated from high school. A friend had a roadster with a flathead Cadillac in it, and we thought this was the hottest thing that ever went down a city street. And so he said, let's go to the drags, brand new racetrack. And that event was put on by the Drag Safari. You remember Chick Cannon, Bud Evans, Bud Coons, and the great photographer Gray Baskerville crisscrossed the country for 3 years staging drag races, helping local guys and gals understand what you had to do to run a drag race. Bear in mind, this is 1955. It's an era that most people don't even realize existed, except through videos like this one and through the still picture realm of going back in time. But I thought, wow, this is really neat. You get close to the drivers, you can get right up next to the car, you can come and go as you please. I said, maybe there's more of these. So that started in 1955, me looking for racetracks wherever I was. I went to college in Iowa studying radio and TV. The reason for that, you had to have some experience to get the first job. If you don't have any experience, you can't get the job, so you can't get any experience actually working. Got a recommendation from a newscaster in Kansas City that was friends with my dad. And he said, go to school, learn how to do the things the way they teach it there and use that as your experience. So I went to Iowa State in Ames, Iowa, and in almost 2 years, I had done everything that was available in the field of radio and TV production, anything. I worked as a part-time announcer at the FM radio station. I was an announcer for pay at the TV station at the time. My job started, my day started with the Mickey Mouse show. And all I really did was sit in an announcer's booth and every half hour say, WOI TV, Channel 5, Ames. That was it. Every now and then you'd read a commercial or some public service message. But I really crammed a lot of the experience into a very short period of time. I went out, got my first job, continuing all this time the quest to go to more drag races. We fast forward, I had a job in Little Rock, Arkansas. I went there because my folks lived there and I could live cheap. And so with that, I was a studio cameraman. To give you an idea, they paid $30 a week if you had no experience as a studio cameraman. But if you had experience, they would start you at 35 because I knew how to handle a TV camera on a dolly and all of those kind of things. I got to 35 a week to start. Impressive, right? Well, a year later, within a year, I was out looking for an announcer's job because that's what I really wanted to do. Found a job at a radio station in Shreveport, Louisiana, started hanging around a speed shop called Shreve Automotive, went to races with them. That led to my first opportunity to announce a race, which was 1959 in Carlisle, Arkansas. It was Eddie Hill and Don Garlitz in a match race. Now you'd say, how did I, with absolutely no experience, get up and get on the microphone at a race like that? Well, I was standing in the staging lanes as they went for their first 2 out of 3 run, and I happened to be standing next to the track operator, the manager. And as I did that, they fired the cars, push start, of course, down the track. Guys made the big swing and turned around and the whole bit. And there was nary a sound. You couldn't hear a word out of the announcer because he didn't say anything. And after that went on for a little bit, I said to the track manager, "What's up?" He says, "I don't know." He says, I said, "Do you mind if I try?" He says, "You couldn't do any worse." So with that, oh, what a vote of confidence, right? I climbed up onto the flatbed trailer that was used as a timing tower. Had a little canvas canopy over your head. And this is on an airport. I mean, this is an airport racetrack. And I'm sitting up there and I'm talking up Garlitz and Eddie Hill in the second round. And I said, this isn't bad. I said, one, you don't have to put up with an announcer that doesn't talk. You don't have to put up with a PA system that doesn't work, and the clocks are right in front of you. You couldn't ask for anything better in terms of a spectator's point of view. So if I had to say a few words to keep everybody happy, to keep me there, I said, let's give it a whirl. There we were, 1959, first race. I said, this isn't bad. Maybe other people would like it. So I started shopping around, looking for racetracks, and the next thing you know, I'm announcing practically every weekend from the first part of April, latter part of March, all the way down through October. So that, in just a few words, is how I got my start. My mother, bless her heart, didn't think too much of it. When I quit the television business in 1969, I went to run a racetrack in Houma, Louisiana, South Louisiana. I was there for almost 2.5 years, and with that, I gained a lot of experience in sport of drag racing and its race promotion. But more importantly, my mother was dead set against it. I finally came to the realization she was more concerned, I think, that her son, the television personality, became her son, the drag racer. In 1971, I left Southland Dragway in Houma and went to Dallas International Motor Speedway, which to me was and still remains the very first true super track built. It was a gorgeous facility with all kinds of trick deals there. My folks had never been to a drag race. This is 69, 10 years after I started announcing. And so we had a points meet at Dallas International, and I invited them to come down from Little Rock and go to the drag races. Now, Dallas International had a 4-story tower. The first 3 floors were working area. The 4th floor was a private club. Texas at the time was totally dry. To get a drink, you had to go to a private club. That was the type of facility. Paneled walls, leather upholstered seating. I mean, it was really nice. Had a bartender on service, another food server working it as well. I went up, I moved one of the couches right next to the window, 4 stories up. You look straight down on the starting line. And I said, Mom and Dad, this is yours. Anything you want, just tell them. It's all taken care of. I never heard another word about my son, the drag racer. And shortly after that, we started doing television shows. I did the very first NHRA shows that went into syndication back in 1973 at the Gator Nationals. I'd done a couple of the earlier one-shot deals, one at Ontario, the other at Dallas International the year before. And so with that, it put me back on TV. So now my mother, who was so impressed with the drag racing world, now has her son, the television guy, back again. It never heard another word of criticism about the drag racing and how I was making a living. As I was announcing around the country, I had the same attitude that every other announcer I've ever met says. I want to announce Indy, the Nationals. To an announcer, that's just like winning Indy is to a racer. So I had been doing announcing jobs down in Division 4 and anywhere that would bring me in. I wrote to Dale Ham, the division director, and said I'd like to try to get into Indy. He sent the note on to California to Wally and Jack Hart. They talked about it. Barbara Parks got involved when she said, well, we don't want him. He's from Louisiana. Nobody can understand him. And they had not heard me work, so it was up to Dale, and I got Dale motivated, and he called Barbara and says, no, you don't understand. He does not have a Southern accent. He's from the Midwest. He's really good. Well, that led to my very first job announcing Indy in 1961. I got paid a roaring $25 and a hotel room for 5 days of work. No travel expenses, no food expenses, no nothing. I had a bed to sleep in. Ollie Olson was my roommate. Ran a gasser, a Willie's gasser out of Florida at the time. Anyway, it was quite an experience. That, of course, led to a 43-year career. My last race that I did was about 2003, so maybe a little less than 43, but gives you an idea of what it was like in those days, how you got recognized. And my good pal Dale Ham, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, carried my water bucket for me and got me in.
Raceway Park, Englishtown, New Jersey. This huge facility, nestled in the greenery of the Garden State, capable of holding the 650 race cars that are here at the 8th Annual NHRA Summer Nationals. An overflow crowd on hand to watch these racers battle for a share of the over $300,000 purse. Hello, everybody. I'm Dave McClelland, and welcome to the Summer Nationals.
I didn't like myself on TV all that much. The problem with it is I was maybe too harsh a critic. I would watch it and I'd say, you dumb, why did you say that? And that was basically my approach at watching the shows. I used it to pick out what I thought were things that didn't really work too well. So I would try to not use them again and do that. In later years, here after I stepped away from the television series at the end of 2000, I, from time to time, watch the current shows and I watch the old shows. And there's a radical difference, as one would expect. We had 1 hour for those earlier shows. Bear in mind, with commercials and open and closes, that's actually about 43 to 44 minutes of actual airtime, as compared to today, when you could have as much as 3 or more hours of program time. Calls for a totally different show. But the energy level in those early shows was constant from the very start to the very end, because you had to get all of that stuff in about 43 minutes. And you didn't have time to really develop a lot of different things. You just reported on the racing. So, I mean, it's a different era today. I'm certainly not being critical of it. I got into it, the modern era, if you will, in the latter few years with Diamond P and NHRA and ESPN. But, yeah, I watched mostly to throw bricks at the screen.
Well, how does it make you feel when people today's race fans say, that was the best drag racing coverage we've ever had, and we will not have drag racing coverage today like it was back then?
Well, I thank them profusely for their compliments and their appreciation of what we tried to do. But I always want everybody to remember that it's two different types of programming. Today's show with 3 hours to fill is a totally different animal from a 1 hour show that has, like I say, about 43 minutes. And it would be very difficult to maintain the energy level for 3 or more hours in today's modern format, because you get so much more in terms of personality profiles. You get a great deal more in terms of technical explanations, whereas the early days of Diamond P, you didn't have that much time to use to that end.
Here's Al Bergler out of Detroit, Michigan, the Motown Shaker. Bergler pulling up into the burnout area. Water puddles allowing the tires to break loose easily, and the 2,000 plus horsepower spinning them, smoking the tires. And you see the parts flying and oil coming out from underneath Al Bergler's car. Apparently something going wrong with the motor. Ray Beadle in the Blue Max pulling into the burnout area, and the official saying shut it off, as Al Bergler dead on the racetrack. The car, lots of mechanical problems. You can see crew members out kicking off the parts and pieces that came bouncing out from behind it. Here comes Al Bergler's crew now. They'll be lifting up the body. Al will be getting out of the car. There was no fire. These cars carry an onboard fire extinguishing system. The NHRA Safety Safari truck pulling out onto the track to begin the cleanup preparation. Let's go down to Frank.
Dave, apparently Bergler threw a rod, and that threw a lot of oil on the track, and that brought the Safety Safari out again to dry this track off. You can hear the thrush machine coming behind me. They'll try and dry it off and get back to racing as soon as they can. I'm holding the pieces in my hand from Bergler's car, evidence of the problem. Back to you, Dave.
It's fascinating that people today, they talk about the oil downs, and they are numerous, as if it never happened in the early days. Well, let me tell you, folks, they didn't call me Oil Down Dave without a reason. That little moniker got tagged on me at Indy one year when we were working with 3 announcers, Bernie Partridge, myself, and the late Steve Evans. And we would rotate an hour on, 2 hours off. You never knew for sure what was going to be running in your hour-long shift, because they didn't segment it out like we did in the later years, where I did the pros, somebody else did the sportsman, and such as that. And I would pick up the microphone, and the first pair of Top Fuel cars that went down the racetrack at Indy, both of them blew up, and they blew stuff everywhere. And for a solid hour, there was no other car that went down that racetrack. That's how bad the oil down was. So from that day on, every time I'd pick up the microphone, somebody would say, "Oh, it's Oil Down Dave back again." How do you prepare for it? I have no earthly idea. You just call on your memory and your ability to string words together. You try your dead level best to make it interesting to the person sitting in the grandstand. I'm not particularly a comedian. If something funny happens and I can think up a quick remark, fine. But I don't go into it with the intent of developing a comic routine. So therefore, I was talking mostly about what's going on in the racing world and then the whole thing. You need a very good memory. It is something that you can't carry around. If you have stats, that's great. If they're easy to access, that's even better. Because that's the one thing that for years, unless you did it yourself, there were no stats available. Now there's a whole lot more from various sources. But it was no planned deal, because when one blows up, you got no idea when it is. I always said, don't use your Sunday stuff on Friday. So if you've got something really good, it may shortchange the attendee on Friday a little bit, but it plays much better before a larger crowd on Sunday.
If you're at your first drag race, you say, "How can anything be louder than that?" Stand back. It's coming.
And the conversation when you say Dave McClelland without saying Steve Evans.
Mm-hmm.
Were you guys like the perfect couple to work out here covering drag racing? What was working with Steve like?
It was ironic that there would be two announcers with pretty much similar activities. Steve was involved in drag racing early on. I, from the radio TV field, got involved in drag racing. We both ran racetracks at approximately the same time. We both were announcers on the NHRA team that was headed up by Bernie Partridge. And then Steve came on board after the first year or maybe a year and a half of Diamond Piece sports coverage on television. And he and I worked together for quite a number of years. Eventually, the coverage went to multiple networks, TNN at the time, and ESPN being the premier carriers of NHRA drag racing. Steve went to the Nashville network coverage. I was the ESPN announcer. And we both followed that path. That was at the request of the networks, not us, not NHRA, but that was as a result of the networks in their little battles in those days. Either way, ESPN was good to me. I lasted till 2000. Steve, of course, passed away that year in 2000, but he was still active in the motorsports coverage. It was quite a relationship. He and I were obviously thrown together a great deal, and that cemented a friendship that lasted for a lot of years. And he was an extremely talented individual that showed it on the TV screen.
Well, you know, he's contributed a whole hell of a lot to the sport of drag racing. Let's see. There's been the fox hunts. There's been the lawsuits and injunctions in Seattle. How about a riot or two? A couple of rapes. Those went over well. Pillages, plunders. And then, of course, a knifing or two at Irwindale, but that was no big deal. You know, just a few of the little thrills have been brought to you by Bill Donor. That's drag racing's answer to Vlad the Impaler and Attila the Hun.
It's very difficult in the sport of being a nonpartisan announcer to separate your personal likes and dislikes, if you have any, from the impartiality that you need to, I think at least, impart to the person that's listening. Thus, I never really had a favorite. I was impressed with practically anybody that would get out on the racetrack and do what these men and women were doing. It was a remarkable thing to stand in the tower and watch the performance level. It was very difficult to not have a favorite, but I've really tried hard to keep it totally impartial, and I think overall I succeeded.
These are the 16 quickest pro stock qualifiers here at the Gator Nationals. As you will note, it is a missing man formation out of respect for the late Lee Shepherd. We ask everyone to join in a moment of silence as a tribute to Lee Shepherd.
How difficult was it for you knowing each one of these drivers on a personal basis when there was a fatality at the track? How tough was that on you, the announcer?
Well, I may not have had any favorites. I certainly had a lot of very, very close friends that were participants in the drag racing world. Obviously, they understood the hazards, the dangers that go with driving a race car. And with that, it really would take a piece of your heart when something went wrong that turned out to be a fatality. If you're an announcer, the first thing you do is try to quiet everybody else in the tower, and then you put your brain to work and you do your dead level best to inform, not entertain, but to keep people up to date with what's going on. Obviously, you do something for 40 some odd years, and you're going to see your fair share of accidents and fatalities. But you just got to put that into a totally different compartment, your emotions, and you're there for a purpose, and that's to keep the audience informed and to keep them at least moderately in control.
Was there any one fatality that caused you to, quote, lose it?
It's kind of like, do you have a favorite driver? I don't rank fatalities one over the other. All of them are tragic. All of them just cut you to the core, particularly if there's somebody you know very, very well. At least I tried to keep it in an impartial, non-emotional sense. But there was no favorite that maybe took the place over others.
You don't have to be rich to race. There are cars you can race and still drive on the street, to school or to work or for play. Look at it this way. If it runs, it can be made to run better.
Versus Shirley. Shirley versus Richard Tharp. Shirley versus Connie. Snake versus Goose. Jenkins versus Glidden. Shepherd versus Glidden. What was your favorite rivalry to announce?
any and all of the above. That the list was endless. Shirley against the world, Garlits beating up on everybody. You pair them together, you had a spectacular show. Same with a host of others. Richard Tharp, one of the good friends that I've made over the years, a fascinating personality from Dallas, drove some of the best race cars in the world. And he and Shirley went at it. Glidden and Jenkins, who could ask for more? I mean, these are superstars in the sport of drag racing, going off heads up, little trash talk here, a lot of trash talk there. It didn't matter. You just used it as best you could to create that moment of excitement in the audience that would bring them to their feet, if you will, much to the chagrin of those behind them who wanted to be able to sit and watch, but you had to stand because this was the show. And it was really quite involved over the years with the pairings coming up as they do. And for whatever reasons, the competition level seemed to increase a little bit every time a certain pair would get together. And you'd use it to your advantage as best you could.
There's no single answer. Drag racing's a way of life. That much is clear. It's one of the few occupations in the world that allows you to control your own success or failure. Once you field a competitive car, you're on your own. You call the shots. You choose the hours you want to work, the races you want to run. If you put together the right combination of parts and ingenuity and luck, you can race your way right to the top. If you don't, you got nobody to blame but yourself.
What do you think about when you go to work? Do you figure it's going to be just another job and going to carry you through until you can find the one that really suits you? Nowhere along the road of success did I ever imagine that I would be considered the voice of NHRA or anything of any magnitude. To me, I was having the time of my life because I got to circulate with the stars of the sport who eventually became close friends, and to really get involved in the sport of drag racing while it was still in a growth mode. There's no way I could have ever predicted that it would be the chosen career for the rest of my life. You think about this as the years go by. How will I be remembered and what will people say about me? I just hope they say he was a nice guy, a good announcer, and what you saw is what you got.